The Dutch Empire and the spice trade stand as one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of global commerce and imperial expansion, shaping the trajectory of trade, politics, and culture across vast regions during the early modern period. The rise of the Dutch Empire in the 16th and 17th centuries was intrinsically tied to the lucrative spice trade, which provided the financial foundation for the Netherlands to assert itself as a maritime superpower. This journey began against the backdrop of fierce European competition for control of trade routes and resources in Asia, primarily driven by the desire for spices like cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and pepper. Luxury goods that were highly valued not only for their culinary uses, but also for their medicinal properties and preservation capabilities in an era lacking refrigeration. The story of the Dutch involvement in the spice trade is marked by daring exploration, innovative maritime strategies, aggressive monopolistic practices, and complex interactions with indigenous societies, as well as their rivals, the Portuguese, Spanish, and British. The roots of the Dutch Empire's ascendancy in the spice trade can be traced back to the late 16th century, during a period when the Netherlands was engaged in its struggle for independence from Spain in what became known as the 80 Years' War, 1568 to 1648. Despite being a relatively small country with limited natural resources, the Dutch possessed exceptional seafaring skills, a burgeoning merchant class, and an innovative financial system centered in Amsterdam. These factors collectively enabled the Dutch to challenge the dominance of the Iberian powers, who had controlled the spice trade routes since the Age of Exploration. Portuguese and Spanish navigators had pioneered direct sea routes to Asia around the Cape of Good Hope and across the Pacific, respectively, allowing them to monopolize the flow of spices to Europe. However, the Dutch, driven by their economic ambitions and a Protestant zeal to undermine Catholic Spain and Portugal, set their sights on breaking this monopoly. In 1595, the Dutch undertook their first major voyage to the East Indies, led by Cornelis de Houtman. Although fraught with challenges, including disease and conflict, this expedition marked the beginning of the Dutch presence in the region. Recognizing the potential for immense profits, Dutch merchants pooled their resources and expertise to form the Dutch East India Company, VOC, in 1602, a revolutionary enterprise that combined private investment with state support. The VOC was granted a monopoly on Dutch trade in Asia, as well as quasi-sovereign powers, including the right to wage war, negotiate treaties, and establish colonies. This model of a state-chartered corporation would become a hallmark of European colonial ventures and set the stage for the VOC to become the wealthiest and most powerful trading entity of its time. The VOC's operations were centered in the Spice Islands, Maluku Islands, of present-day Indonesia, where the finest nutmeg, mace, and cloves were produced. The company established its headquarters in Batavia, modern Jakarta, on the island of Java in 1619, creating a strategic hub for its activities in Asia. From Batavia, the VOC launched a series of military campaigns and diplomatic maneuvers to secure control over key spice-producing regions. One of the most notorious examples of Dutch ruthlessness was the conquest of the Banda Islands, a tiny archipelago renowned for its nutmeg. In 1621, VOC Governor-General Jan Pieterszoon Cohen orchestrated a brutal campaign to subjugate the Bandanese, resulting in the massacre or enslavement of much of the local population. The VOC then repopulated the islands with enslaved laborers from other parts of Asia and established plantations under strict Dutch control, ensuring a monopoly on nutmeg production. The Dutch pursued similar strategies elsewhere, employing a combination of force, alliances, and economic leverage to dominate the spice trade. They expelled the Portuguese from key ports such as Malacca in 1641 and Ceylon, Sri Lanka, in the mid-17th century, securing valuable cinnamon plantations. They also contested British influence in the region, culminating in agreements such as the Treaty of Breda, 1667, which formalized Dutch control over valuable spice territories in exchange for ceding the colony of New Amsterdam, modern-day New York, to the English. Through these actions, the VOC established a vast and interconnected trade network that extended from the East Indies to Japan, India, and China, and ultimately back to Europe via the Cape of Good Hope. Central to the success of the Dutch spice trade was the innovative infrastructure and logistics system developed by the VOC. The company operated a fleet of heavily armed ships designed to transport large quantities of goods while deterring pirates and rival European powers. The VOC also established a network of fortified trading posts and warehouses, allowing it to control the storage and distribution of spices. Back in the Netherlands, the company's financial operations were equally sophisticated. The VOC was the first multinational corporation to issue shares of stock, creating a vast pool of capital that enabled it to fund its expansive operations. The dividends paid to shareholders from the profits of the spice trade were often extraordinarily high, further fueling investment and public support for the enterprise. The impact of the Dutch spice trade extended far beyond economics. The influx of spices and other Asian goods transformed European diets, fashion, and lifestyles, contributing to what some historians term the consumer revolution of the early modern era. The profits generated by the spice trade also financed advancements in Dutch art, science, and architecture, leading to the Dutch Golden Age. During this period, artists such as Rembrandt and Vermeer produced masterpieces that reflected the wealth and cultural sophistication of the 17th century Netherlands, while scientists like Christian Huygens and Antony van Leeuwenhoek made groundbreaking discoveries in fields ranging from astronomy to microbiology. The spice trade, in this sense, was not merely a commercial enterprise, but a driver of broader societal transformation. However, the Dutch dominance of the spice trade was not without its challenges and costs. The VOC's monopolistic practices and reliance on coerced labor generated significant resentment among indigenous populations, leading to frequent uprisings and resistance. Maintaining control over distant colonies and trade routes required constant military expenditures and diplomatic maneuvering, straining the company's resources. Moreover, the VOC faced growing competition from other European powers, particularly the British East India Company, which began to challenge Dutch dominance in the 18th century. The economic landscape was also shifting, as the focus of global trade gradually moved from spices to other commodities, such as textiles, tea, and eventually industrial goods. By the late 18th century, the VOC was in decline, plagued by corruption, mismanagement, and rising debts. The company's monopoly on the spice trade was increasingly undermined by smuggling and the entry of new players into the market. In 1799, after nearly 2 centuries of operation, the VOC was formally dissolved, and its assets and territories were taken over by the Dutch government. While the Dutch Empire continued to exert influence in parts of Asia, particularly in Indonesia, the era of the spice trade as the foundation of Dutch power had come to an end. The legacy of the Dutch Empire and the spice trade is complex and multifaceted. On one hand, it highlights the remarkable ingenuity and entrepreneurial spirit of the Dutch, who overcame significant geographic and political obstacles to establish a global trading empire. The VOC's innovations in finance, logistics, and corporate governance left a lasting impact on the world, laying the groundwork for modern capitalism. On the other hand, the story of the Dutch spice trade is also a cautionary tale of exploitation and imperialism. The pursuit of profit often came at the expense of human lives and cultural heritage, as indigenous societies were subjected to violence, displacement, and economic domination. The environmental impact of monoculture plantations and resource extraction further underscores the long-term costs of the spice trade. The Dutch Empire's involvement in the spice trade also underscored the interconnectedness of the world long before the modern era of globalization. By linking Asia, Europe, and Africa through trade, the VOC facilitated cultural exchanges that reshaped societies across continents. For instance, European art, literature, and cuisine were enriched by Asian influences, while Asian markets experienced the influx of European goods, technologies, and ideas. However, this interconnectedness was often asymmetrical, as the Dutch and other colonial powers wielded disproportionate influence over trade terms and political structures, often to the detriment of local populations. Another significant aspect of the Dutch spice trade was its role in fostering advancements in cartography, navigation, and shipbuilding. To maintain their competitive edge, the Dutch developed highly accurate maps and innovative ship designs, such as the Vloot, which was specifically engineered for carrying large cargoes with minimal crew. These technological and intellectual advancements not only served the VOC's immediate commercial interests, but also contributed to the broader development of European maritime power. The Dutch Republic's commitment to education and science further supported these endeavors, with institutions such as the University of Leiden playing a key role in training navigators, merchants, and scholars. The social and cultural impact of the spice trade within the Netherlands itself was profound. The wealth generated by the VOC contributed to the rise of a prosperous middle class, whose tastes and lifestyles came to define the Dutch Golden Age. Lavish homes, adorned with Asian porcelain, textiles, and furniture, became symbols of status and success. This newfound affluence also fostered a thriving cultural scene, as patrons supported artists, writers, and scientists. Yet this prosperity was not evenly distributed, as the benefits of the spice trade were concentrated among a small elite of merchants, investors, and VOC officials. Meanwhile, the harsh realities of life for sailors, soldiers, and colonial subjects often went unacknowledged in the celebratory narratives of Dutch achievement. In conclusion, the Dutch Empire and the spice trade represent a pivotal chapter in the history of globalization, marked by extraordinary achievements and profound contradictions. The rise and fall of the VOC illustrate the possibilities and perils of global commerce, offering lessons that continue to resonate in our interconnected world. As we reflect on this history, it is important to acknowledge both the ingenuity that drove the Dutch to the heights of maritime and economic power, and the enduring consequences of their actions for the peoples and ecosystems they encountered. The legacy of the Dutch spice trade serves as a reminder of the complexities of human ambition, the costs of imperial expansion, and the transformative power of commerce in shaping the course of history.